For those of you that are watching with us online, my name is Curt Taylor. I'm one of the pastors here on staff, specifically at the Woodway Campus, and we're glad you're here, wherever you are, whether you're in the room, you are at home, maybe you're in the car, hopefully not driving. We are glad that you are here. However old you are, if you're like me, you never stop having some trepidation about the dark. I've got a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, an 18-month-old, and we have that talk every night at nighttime that we start turning out the lights, and sometimes it gets a little bit too dark. And if you've ever been there before where it's just a little bit too dark, it just kind of feels uncomfortable, it kind of feels creepy. Still, now at my age, sometimes when it's completely dark and I hear some noise in some other part of the house, my mind instantly goes to the worst case scenario. Like logically, I know that there's not some evil, terrible thing that's in my house trying to get me, but that is the first thing that my mind assumes is happening. I remember when I was in college, and my brother and I, at one point, we shared an apartment in college, and we each had our own room. And when you're a college student, you sleep a lot during the daytime. And so because I slept a lot during the daytime, I had taken foil, and I put that foil over my windows on the inside, not on the outside. I'm not that tacky, all right? On the inside, so you couldn't see it from the outside. But I foiled all my windows so that in the middle of the day, if you turned off the light, completely black. Like you couldn't see your hand in front of you, completely dark. Most of the time, that was great. Gave you good napping opportunities. I remember one time vividly, I'd gone to sleep. It was the middle of the night, and somewhere around 2 o'clock in the morning, I hear a door slam. Now, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, so I'm not really thinking logically, like looking back. I know that I made some poor choices in that moment, but in that moment at 2 a.m., I assumed that someone had just slammed a door inside my room. And so I bolt upright. Now, to give you a little bit of context, and this is going to be crazy for you if you're younger and you're watching, I did not have a cell phone when I was in college. Didn't have one. I was on a mattress that was actually on the ground. I didn't even have a bed. It's not that I was that poor. I was just a college student. I just didn't care. So I'm on a mattress that's on the ground. I didn't have a lamp. Because I don't have a cell phone, the only light in the room is across the room by the entrance, like the light switch. And so for about 10 seconds, I'm sitting up in bed, complete darkness, assuming that someone has slammed a door inside my room. And so I just did what I thought I needed to do. I said, "Hey, who's there?" With a really deep voice, because I don't necessarily have the deepest voice in the first place. I said, "Hey, who's there?" Man, I will wreck you, all right? You best go now. Silence. And so I'm thinking to myself, clearly no one's in the room, but about 2 minutes, 5 minutes go by, and I just can't sleep. I'm like, in the back of my mind, like there's somebody in the room. What if the moment I go to sleep, bam, they pounce on me? And so I got up, and I was just going to slowly make my way across the room, but fear in the back of my mind is getting the best of me, and I'm thinking, but what if they're here still? And so I decided I'm just going to bolt really quickly. I'm just going to jump across the room, flip on the light, then I'll be able to know what's going on. And so I'm sitting in bed, the mattress on the ground, and I count down to myself and say, okay, 3, 2, 1. I jump across the room. I make it about 4 feet, and bam, something slams into me. In the back of my mind, I think, we're tussling. That's what's going on. I don't really know how to fight, but I can start flailing. And so that's exactly what I did. I just started flailing, and the more I flailed, the more it hurt. I mean, it just smacked into me. Something smacked me on the arm. Ultimately, I end up on the ground just rolling around. I crawl my way over to the doorway. I flip on the light, and at 2 o'clock in the morning, probably 2:30 by now, I realized that I had just had a fight with the weight bench that I had in the middle of my room. I didn't use it very often to actually lift weights, but it looked cool when people came over that I had some weights right there. And once I turned on that light, I looked around the room, and here's what I realized. I was completely and utterly alone. Nobody else was there. As I sat there and waited and listened, eventually I figured out that the people in the apartment above me were having some kind of a fight. I kept hearing doors slam and yelling back and forth. 2 a.m. in the morning, scared of the dark, I end up fighting with a weight bench. Let me just go ahead and tell you, the weight bench won. It hurt. I had somehow knocked the bar off, and it had like I knocked it down. It flew up, it hit me. I mean, it was just bad. I ended up bleeding and bruised. But the moment that you turn on that light, you realize how silly I was. The moment that the light came on, it illuminated the darkness in this way where all of a sudden I had context. Before, I was terrified, I was uncertain, I was unsure. But the moment the light comes on in the room, there's clarity. I understand things that I didn't understand a moment before. As we're in this season, which is just a really weird season where all of a sudden life has slowed way down. For a lot of us, it feels like it's completely stopped. Like you're in the car and you're kind of moving forward, but not very fast, like you're just idling. You're just sitting there. And in these moments, there are opportunities for us to figure out what is going on, for us to reflect on our life, to flip on the light, to really evaluate right now, where I am, and it illuminates what's going on. What means the most to me? What do I value? It's interesting. I tell my kids, they're only 7 and 5, and then the 18-month-old, I tell her too, but she doesn't really quite grasp it. I say, you will remember this for the rest of your life. You will be 40 years, 50 years, 60 years from now, you will remember that time when you were in first grade or you were in kindergarten and you didn't go to school for like 2.5 months, and then we really didn't go anywhere for a few months, and we just stayed home, and all of a sudden people were wearing masks. You will never forget this for the rest of your life, and just like those kids will never forget it for the rest of your life, neither will you, and neither will I. That for the rest of our life, this will be a moment that we remember. But here's my question for you. Is this going to be a turning point in our lives? Is it going to be one of those moments that we can look back and say, my life changed in that moment because I had the opportunity to stop and reflect and evaluate? I could shine a light on some areas of my life that maybe I'd never paid attention to before. Now, maybe you're in here and it's a really difficult season for you. I know that there are people, whether you're in the room or you're watching, I know that there are people that you've lost a job. Maybe you are just paralyzed by fear and anxiety. I know people that are going through huge relationship struggles right now and strife right now. I know that there's all kinds of panic. I know there's health, and I know there are people that have lost loved ones. And so I'm not saying that it's an easy season, but oftentimes it's those most difficult seasons of life that we learn the most. If you've got a Bible, flip open to Exodus chapter 32. We're going to be looking at one of the most famous stories in Exodus. To give us a little bit of context, while you're flipping to Exodus chapter 32, I want to read a little bit from Exodus chapter 24. This is what is going on. This is what sets it up. So God has given them the law, He's given them the 10 commandments, and then in Exodus chapter 24, the Lord talks to Moses, and He says, I want you to come up on the mountain. I'm going to give you a physical tablet that will have the law. They already have the law, but He's going to physically give it to them on a tablet. And then it says in Exodus chapter 24, verse 18, Moses entered the cloud and went up on the mountain, and Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. So Moses goes up the mountain. The rest of the people of Israel, they're just hanging out. They're down on the side. They got nothing to do. They see Moses leave. Moses tells them, like, hey, I'll be back. Just hang out, wait for me. Time goes by. Time goes by. They're doing nothing. I mean, they're just waiting around for Moses. Some amount of time goes by, and then in Exodus chapter 32, the rest from 24 to 32, it's all about what's happening on the mountain with Moses. Now in 32, we go back to the people of Israel, and this is what it says. It says, when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, up or come, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. So Aaron said to them, take off the rings of gold that are in your ears of your wives and your sons and your daughters and bring them to me. So all the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." And they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Now pause for a second. Let's figure out exactly what's going on. At first, they just get bored. I mean, Moses has left. They start to kind of grumble and complain. We're sitting around. We got nothing to do. We're waiting and waiting, and we're tired of waiting. And then someone says, hey, he probably died. We should probably move on. And what Moses functioned as for the people of Israel, he was the mediator between them and God. And so somehow they decided it's been too long. He's probably dead. He's not coming back. So we need a new mediator. And so they go to Aaron, who Moses left in charge. And they said, we want you to make us an idol. Now, in Exodus chapter 20, we have the 10 Commandments. First two commandments are about idols. The first ones have no other God before me. That I am God alone, nobody else. Second one, do not make a false idol, an image that represents God. Don't do it. And so here, really not that much time has passed since then, and we see him go to Aaron, and they say, hey, Moses is gone, so we need an idol. That thing that God told us we're not supposed to do. Yeah, we want you to build us one that's a representative for us and God. And so they take all their gold, and most likely what happens is Aaron melts down the gold, builds some type of a wooden calf. We're not really sure how big it is, but he builds some kind of a wooden calf, and then they press the melted down gold, they press it around that calf, so it's this golden image that now represents God. And now interesting about that golden calf, that they came from the land of Egypt, and when they were in Egypt, one of the main Egyptian gods that they worshiped was that same God, a golden calf. They were going to the land of Canaan, which that land predominantly they worshiped Baal, and Baal, their god, was represented oftentimes by a golden calf. So they had taken these other gods that they had seen culture around them worship, and they said, okay, we're gonna have that same God, but here's what's interesting about it. They still are worshiping Yahweh. It says, when it has there in verse 5, when it says, tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord, it's all caps Lord. It's that word Yahweh in Hebrew. So they have something that they're not supposed to do. They've built this calf, but they're still trying to somehow worship the same God that brought them out of Israel, the one true God. They're trying to worship Yahweh somehow through this calf. But in this moment when they're worshiping God or supposedly worshiping God, you see that very last verse there in verse 6. It says, and the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. That word play in Hebrew, it represents sexual immorality. So the type of play that's going on here is immoral play. They're doing stuff they are not supposed to do. There's a part of you that just takes a step back and you wonder, what on earth? Like, how dumb do you have to be that God has performed miracle after miracle after miracle, done these amazing things for them, and then in this just moment of their life where they get bored, they drift away so quickly from him. When I examine my own heart, my own life, I realize that oftentimes is true of me too, especially in those moments in life when we're bored. Those moments like now in life when we are idle, they can be moments that reveal our idols to us, moments where we reflect on our life and evaluate our life and figure out what are those things that I'm really worshiping in life. Or they can be moments in life where I start creating idols. I start going after my heart's desire and doing things that I shouldn't do. What is an idol? An idol really is anything that we put at the center of our life other than God. Anytime I love something, anything more than God, then it is an idol in my life. An idol, typically it's some type of a good thing that I turn into the ultimate thing. So an idol could be power, it could be money, it could be pleasure, it could be fame. But an idol could just be your family. It could be your health. It could be a good thing that somehow in my life I turn into the ultimate thing. And there's a great quote by St. Augustine where he says, the essence of sin is disordered love. What he's saying is when my life's order gets out, when instead of saying, okay, God is first in my life, and then my wife and my marriage, and then my kids and my family, and then work, instead of having the right order, somehow I start piecing some other things up there in the wrong order. Now, here's the tricky part about really evaluating my life and trying to figure out where my idols are. It's oftentimes it's easier to see other people's idols than my own. Like it's easy right now, you can think of it, of friends and family where you think of their life and you're like, man, they are jacked up. Like, let me go ahead and tell you, I know a friend, a neighbor, and he definitely worships money or his work more than these other things. I know by just evaluating his life, he spends way too much time focused on that and not nearly enough time focused on his marriage or his kids. Definitely not his relationship with God. Like it's easy to judge other people. What's really hard to do is to judge ourselves. You ever wondered why that is? I've been a youth pastor before, and I remember going to youth camp a handful of years ago, and there's this one consistent theme that happens with junior high guys at youth camp, and that is they don't like to shower. Like part of the reason that you try and make them go swim at youth camp is because for whatever reason, they're just like, nah, I don't need that, I'm not going to. And there's this false idea that if they just take this thing called Axe body spray, and if they just spray it, that it will mask and cover all the bad body odor. But here's the problem, it doesn't. Like body odor is so bad that if you're not regularly bathing and you just try and spray some of this stuff on it, here's what happens. The body odor is still there. It's just mixed with fresh ocean mist body odor. And so you'll be around this junior high kid and you'll smell odor and then somehow at the same time smell this like botanical garden. And those smells just don't mix very well together. Science will teach you that your nose stops smelling the things that you're around all the time. So there are certain things in your life that you smell every single day. The smell of your house, for example. Whatever your house or your car smells like, because you smell that all the time, eventually your nose stops smelling it. It's kind of scary. You've been to other people's houses before or other people's cars where you go in and you're like, man, it smells weird in here. And they don't smell it. Like it's just not, don't even recognize that their house smells bad. Maybe they've got a pet or an animal and you can totally smell that pet or animal, but they can't smell it. Why? Because they're around it all the time. And your body starts to stop smelling odors you have around you all the time in order that if there's a fire or something like that, you can smell something that's important. And so, why then is it hard to smell our own odors? Because you just don't smell them, other people can. In the same way, idols in our life work that same way. That it's difficult in my own life. It's difficult in my own life to recognize my issues, my junk, my problems. The only way to do it is for me to stop, to slow down and really evaluate what's going on. Here's the problem with idols, every single one of them. When I start to love something more than God, when I start to get the essence of love disordered in my life, and I take something that's a good thing and I make it the ultimate thing, it will eventually destroy my life. Every single idol does it every single time. So when my life is consumed by whether it be pleasure or whether it be money or whether it be power, that ultimately what's going to happen is that thing, by pursuing it over and over and over again, will eventually wreck me. And you know it. You've seen it. You know people right now that they had some addiction. They couldn't break it. And because of that, it destroyed their life. John Calvin says the human heart is an idol-making factory. And then he goes on to say this, the God whom man has thus conceived inwardly, he attempts to embody outwardly. That's exactly what happens with Israel. What is it that the Israelites wanted? Well, why did they try and build this calf and use this calf to worship God? They wanted to worship God, but instead of worshiping God on his terms, they wanted to worship God on their terms. They said, okay, God, we want the benefits. We want the miracles. We want the cool stuff. We still want you to part waters and have manna fall from heaven. We want that stuff. But look, we're tired of waiting around. We're tired of being in the desert. We're tired of doing whatever you want us to do. So we want the benefits without the obligations. How many times have we done that same thing in our own lives? That in my own life, I can think of different moments in time where Christianity to me, I was trying to somehow take culture and Christianity and merge them together. That I wanted to live a life just the same way that culture exemplifies. I wanted all the stuff that culture magnified and said was good. I wanted those things in my life, but I also wanted God somehow. I wanted to go to church on Sunday morning, but then live however I wanted to live the rest of the week. That doesn't work. That disorder leads to destruction. In Exodus chapter 32, look at verse 7. It says, and the Lord said to Moses, go down, for your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way that I commanded them. They have made for themselves a golden calf and have worshiped it and sacrificed it and said, these are your gods, O Israel, who have brought you out of the land of Egypt. And the Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Your translation might say an obstinate people or a stubborn people. How many times in my life have I been obstinate with my relationship with God, or stubborn in my relationship with God, or stubborn in any other way where my life gets out of order? Right now is a moment where we can stop and reflect. We can look back on our lives and say, has my life, the life I've been living, has it been in the right order or the wrong order? I don't know of any person who gets to the end of their life looking back, knowing that they were a bad dad or a bad husband, that says, you know what, I did that intentionally. In that moment, I chose work or I chose money over my family or my wife. I don't know anybody that says that. What they will all say is it was an accident. That they were trying to juggle both things. They were trying to live a life that made them a good husband and a good father and live for God. But at the same time, they were trying to pursue these other things on the side. And somehow, without even knowing it, those other pursuits became their primary pursuits. They became idols in their life. And at the end of their life, they can look back with regret and recognize that those idols destroyed so much. They destroyed their relationship with God. They destroyed their marriage. They destroyed their family. We don't do it on purpose. It's just easy to drift. Because oftentimes the busyness of life, we're just going from one thing to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. And when we do that, it's like this fragrance that we've just sprayed all over the place. It's hard for me to evaluate because life is so busy. But in this moment, when it all stops, I've heard from so many people about how much they're hating life right now. I've had people say, we're gonna need marriage counseling because of the quarantine. And what I would push back on them, for most people, I would say that you probably needed marriage counseling before the quarantine. The quarantine is simply revealing in your life some underlying issues that have always been there. And so what do? How do we fix it? My 5-year-old, Kinley, the other day she was at school and they had a fire truck come to school. Obviously this was a few months ago because she hasn't been to school in a while. But a few months ago she was at school and they had a fire truck come. And when that fire truck came, they taught them stop, drop, and roll. And I remember when she came home and she was very excited. She had a big grin on her face. She's always kind of excited. And she says, Dad, guess what? A fire truck was at school today. And I learned something very interesting. I said, what is it that you learned? She said, if I see a fire, stop, drop, roll. And I said, Wait, time out. When you see a fire, you're supposed to do that? Yes. If I see a fire, stop, drop, and roll. I said, okay, that is really important to learn. The order is important here too, because it's if you're on fire. All right, so not if you see a fire, but if you are on fire, that's when you stop, drop, and roll. And she goes, right, got it. In our lives, that same principle of stop, drop, and roll, I think it applies right now. That the first thing, if we want to figure out what are the idols in my life, the first thing we have to do is to stop. We've got to pause. We've got to really take this moment to evaluate our lives. And it's hard to evaluate our lives. But try and ask, what are those things in my life that I can't live without? That if you remove that from my life is almost not worth living. If that's the case, it's an idol. Idols are typically good things that we turn into ultimate things. How do we first get rid of them? We have to pause, we have to stop, we have to reflect, we have to evaluate. The next thing is that drop. We've got to prioritize our life better. The essence of sin is when we prioritize our life in the wrong way. And so if I tried to stop right now and recognize, okay, I want to live life the way that God wants me to live. Everybody here can prioritize your life. You know the right way. You know that it's supposed to be God and then my marriage and then my family. But the truth is that actually how you're living? And if not, what changes do you need to make it happen? Pause. Prioritize your life. And the last is, what are you pursuing? So I gotta, if I see fire, if I'm on fire, I gotta stop my life. I gotta drop. I gotta start rolling. I gotta roll towards safety in my life. I've gotta pause. I've gotta prioritize. And then what am I pursuing? You can tell what you're pursuing by where you're spending your time. Someday, 20 years from now, 5, 10 years from now, you're gonna look back, excuse me, I haven't preached in a long time. Voice is gone. You're gonna look back on this moment, and this can be a life-altering, life-changing moment. That you say, man, my life, maybe it looked good, but it was wrecked. But I reprioritized some things. I started pursuing God. I started pursuing my spouse. I started pursuing my kids. And the best thing that ever happened to me was when I got my life in the right order as a result of 2020, the crazy, crazy year that was.